Welcome back to Let's Get Haunted
with your hosts,
Nat Strawn
and Allie. Welcome back, Haunties, to episode 209 of Let's Get Haunted. We are coming at you live and in color because it's filmed. So head over to YouTube if you haven't already got the memo. We are filming February's episodes to see how you guys like it.
Yeah, and if you like it, for sure tell us, because we are 100% gonna quit this. These video episodes are so much more difficult to edit and take so much more out of us. I mean, look at Allie's hair. It looks amazing.
Oh,
How
thank
long
you.
did that take? You guys don't even know about what we're doing off the screen. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a whole thing. It's a whole production. And so if you guys don't like it, we're gonna stop and we're gonna assume that all of you guys don't like it, unless you're like, no, please don't cancel.
It is definitely more of a pain than we thought it would be, but we're willing to do many things for you guys as long as it is something that you actually want. Tell the truth. If this sucks, you can tell us. We're trying to do better every year for you guys, so give us the feedback. Stay tuned because many new exciting things are always on the horizon for Let's Get Haunted. Natalia, are you ready to get into episode 209?
I'm so ready to get into this episode. Let's go.
Dust and dirt sting your face as you squint into the Arizona sunshine, the air thick with heat waves rippling across the barren expanse. The smell of sagebrush drifts on the breeze, mingling with the acrid tang of gunpowder. Around you, the parched earth is cracked and red, dotted with scraggly mesquite trees and towering saguaro cacti that seem to reach pleadingly toward the pale blue sky. Will the rain ever come? A tumbleweed rolls past your toes as the mournful cry of a hawk circling high above echoes down the sandy road. A row of rustic wooden buildings, still under construction, stand stoically in an empty valley of nothingness, saloon doors swinging lazily in the wind. Several old-timers rest on stools on a half-finished saloon porch, grunting to each other through tobacco-stuffed lips. Arizona in the Wild West doesn't just promise adventure, it demands it. For today's episode, we're stepping back in time to the wind-blown desert plains of the late 1800s during an era in American history known as the Wild West.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. You guys, this used to be like my favorite time period on Earth. I don't know if you guys remember this from like the earlier seasons, but I was really into the Wild West because everyone's on horses, everyone's like sexy with like cool facial hair. The girls are all like just working brothels or mothers, which I guess that's not great, but
No. Slay.
I love the treasure aspect of the Old West. It's me really excited because there's lots of treasure. Is this a story about treasure?
Well, the real treasure might be the friendship we make along the way. But I am glad that you brought up that you used to be obsessed with this era because as I was writing this, there's some crossover with the Superstition Mountains a little bit, which I know we brought up in the episode of The Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine, which was a very excellent, epic story that we covered all the way back in season 1. So hopefully you guys remember it. But I'm going to send you, Natalia, right now some pictures of Arizona in the late 1800s, just a bunch of different cities, and I want you to describe them to our listeners. If you are listening at home, you can head over to @Let'sGetHaunted on Instagram, or you can head over to youtube.com/C/Let's Get Haunted, I think it is, to check out these pictures for yourself. Otherwise, Natalia is going to describe them now.
This is a black and white photo of, is that Arizona? There's like a snowy mountain in the back. I didn't realize Arizona had snowy mountains. Yeah, and it just looks like an old west town. You know how they had those stores that had like the big board in the front? I mean, they look like fake, I don't know why in the Wild West they like tried to
Yeah.
make everything look like it was like a
set.
stage play or something. Yeah, like a set. They were really into like making it look like it was a 2-story building when it wasn't for some reason. And then next picture, oh, this is Tombstone, Arizona, which we've actually been to.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It looks like a hard place to live. I'm just seeing flat desert expanse and then just littered with like a few homes. This one is it says Street View in Tucson. And wow, this is crazy. Yeah, I see people on horses. I see like a dude in a big sombrero with like a poncho on. I see dogs running around. It looks like chaos, like covered wagons going down the street. This guy that's on top of the horse has like some sort of large gun strapped across his back. I mean, pretty crazy. This one is actually been colorized. Like little modest homes littering the hillside. And yeah, just that old West vibe. You know, where it's like the middle of nowhere and then there's like a little, it looks like a Disney set. Like they don't look like real places at all. And they all look like they could just fall over if there was like a breeze, you know?
Yeah, and I'm sure everybody has an alcoholic uncle that watched John Wayne growing up. It's very much like, don't change anything about the stereotypical Old West sets that you're used to seeing in whether it's like a spaghetti western or, you know, a classic TV land show or movie. All of that stuff is what it looked like during this era. And of course, there are exceptions. There were cities that were, or towns that were more built up, but we're not talking about the more built up areas of the country. The Wild West specifically refers to this time in history where there was all of this westward expansion in the United States and people were building from the ground up. So you'd have to get out there. There's no gas stations. There's no cars. There's no motels, hotels to stay at. I mean, you're following a trail. And it would start to get more populated as time went on and more settlements popped up, but you were really on your own. It was very much wild. While there's no concrete start and stop date to define this era, historians generally consider this period of time to be confined to the years following the Civil War, roughly from the mid-1860s to the late 1890s or the early 1900s. Following the Civil War, the United States focused on spreading westward to expand the country's borders. Some of this migration was out of circumstance, such as formerly enslaved people from the South searching for new opportunities in the West, and some of this migration was a product of government incentives, such as the Homestead Act of 1862, which promised settlers 160 acres of free land if they improved it within 5 years. This mass migration was made even more popular with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in '69. Stretching approximately 1,912 miles in length, the wrought iron rails connected Omaha, Nebraska in the east to Sacramento, California in the west. This monumental endeavor positively impacted the country by making travel between the eastern states and the western territories easier than ever, allowing for faster and more reliable transport of people, goods, and mail. However, this westward expansion, so often romanticized in film, art, and pop culture, was in reality fraught with death, disease, and crime. I haven't always been very nice to my skin. Especially in my teens and early 20s, I did everything you're not supposed to do. I've been a side sleeper and a stomach sleeper. I've purposefully chosen not to wear sunscreen or sunglasses to music festivals and beaches. I've slept in makeup, woken up the next day, and continued to wear that half rubbed off makeup for an additional 24 hours. I've used a tanning bed, peeled my sunburns, ruined my moisture barrier, given myself chemical burns, squeezed blackheads, and a billion other gross things. If you're cringing right now, you should be. I had no clue what I was doing because I lacked the education. But you don't have to go down the same route I did. Feeling confident in your own skin starts with getting expert care. That's why we're excited to partner with Apostrophe. Whether you're dealing with acne, signs of aging, or dark spots, Apostrophe helps you get access to the right treatments for your skin. Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with an expert dermatology team team to get customized acne and dermatology treatment for your unique skin. Through Apostrophe, you can get access to oral and topical medications that use clinically proven ingredients to help clear acne. Simply fill out an online consultation about your skin goals and your medical history, then snap a few selfies, and a dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan just for you. I've been on a skincare journey with the help of Apostrophe, and I've seen so much improvement with my skin texture in particular. I've always suffered from this weird, bumpy orange peel-like skin around my chin, but with my Tret prescription that I got with the help of Apostrophe, my orange peel is a thing of the past. We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/letsgethaunted when you use our code LET'SGETHAUNTED. That's a savings of $15, and this code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/letsgethaunted and click Get Started, then use our code LET'SGETHAUNTED at sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this week's episode. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting. So can you think, Natalia, of some of the episodes we've done in the past that are set in this era or around this time, and what some of the challenges might be that people experienced?
The one that comes off the top of my head would be medical care. I mean, most of these people would die from preventable diseases and infections from just having wounds that weren't treated to properly or improper hygiene. I know at this time period, this would be like a time where if you were lucky, you would lose a leg, and
rather
survive.
Than your life.
Yeah, exactly. And so I know that during the Wild West or whatever, a lot of famous characters that we see had missing an eye or missing an ear, or they had physical attributes that people recognized them by that were due to medical care at the time. Like they walked with a limp, something like that. And then other challenges would be, getting water. Getting water in the middle of the desert is always gonna suck, which is why I don't understand why people want to live there. My in-laws really like Arizona. They lived in Sedona for a while. And while it is a beautiful place, in modern times, when I can go inside, shut the door, get an air conditioning, and then get a cold glass of water whenever I want, I could not ever see myself wanting to settle down there. These must literally be reptilian people who are attracted to the desert, because clearly the way their nervous system works is different than mine, because I cannot stand being hot. I can't.
It's people that had nothing to lose were the people that were moving westward. And for the most part, I'm sure there were some business people or people that had high up positions that were being paid to go out and help settle communities. But for the most part, it was people that really had nothing to lose. Entire communities faced hardships as they attempted to carve out lives in unfamiliar and often hostile environments. Settlers battled extreme weather, food shortages, and the ever-present threat of illness. Small towns that sprang up along railway lines and in mining areas frequently lacked infrastructure, leading to unsanitary living conditions and outbreaks of diseases like cholera and typhoid. While some settlers thrived, many failed to establish lasting homesteads, forced to abandon their dreams and their property and return eastward, or move even further west into the unknown. If I were to ask you to picture the quintessential settler of America's Wild West, I'd bet most of us would either picture an aproned woman with her hair tucked into a bonnet making the grueling trek west by covered wagon via the Oregon Trail, or a whiskered cowboy, tall and lean in a suede leather hat like in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. While it's certainly true that these types of settlers did exist in large numbers, the reality of this time in history was much more diverse. After the abolition of slavery, many formerly enslaved people sought new lives in the West, hoping to escape the entrenched racism of the South. Some became known as exodusters, establishing all-black towns like Nicodemus, Kansas, where they could live free from the immediate threat of violence and discrimination. Others found work as cowboys, soldiers in the Buffalo Soldiers Regiment, or laborers on railroads. Despite these opportunities, Black Americans faced widespread racism and segregation in the West, often excluded from the same rights and protections accommodations offered to white settlers. Violence, including lynchings and vigilante justice, was a constant threat, and Black pioneers were often forced to navigate a society that, while less structured than the South, still viewed them through the lens of prejudice. Thousands of Chinese laborers played a vital role in building the Transcontinental Railroad, often performing some of the most dangerous and grueling tasks, such as blasting through mountains and laying tracks in harsh climates. And despite their contributions, they were often paid significantly less, living in squalid conditions and facing brutal racism, including physical violence and exclusionary laws. After the railroad's completion, many Chinese immigrants sought work in mining, agriculture, and service industries, but hostility against them intensified. Laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 prohibited further immigration and restricted their rights, leaving many stranded in poverty and isolation. Asian settlers also faced mob violence, such as the Rock Springs Massacre of 1885, where dozens of Chinese miners were killed or displaced by white mobs in Wyoming. Despite these challenges, Asian communities established Chinatowns and other cultural hubs in Western towns, creating resilient communities that preserved their heritage while contributing significantly to the development of the American West. In addition to these settler struggles, the westward expansion came at a devastating cost to Native American tribes. Entire communities were forcibly displaced, subjected to violent military campaigns, and confined to reservations as the U.S. government seized indigenous lands. The buffalo, a vital resource for many tribes, was hunted nearly to extinction to clear the way for railroads and settlements. In the American Southwest, Mexican influence was especially notable, as Mexican vaqueros were pioneers of cattle ranching, bringing with them techniques like roping, branding, and herding cattle, as well as use of different saddles, lassos, and spurs. With the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ending the Mexican-American War of 1848, Mexicans living in these areas became U.S. citizens, many going on to establish their own ranches and farms. However, many of them faced significant challenges in retaining these lands and their rights. Widespread legal disputes and biased court systems often resulted in the loss of property to Anglo settlers. For example, in California, the Land Act of 1851 required Mexican landowners to prove the validity of their claims, a lengthy and costly process that many could simply not afford, leading to the forfeiture of their lands. Additionally, many Mexican ranchers were displaced by the influx of settlers during the gold rush, who disregarded property boundaries and sometimes resorted to violence. The combined struggles of humans during westward expansion laid the groundwork for many of the ghost stories and legends that emerged from the Wild West. Tales of restless spirits haunting abandoned homesteads, ghostly riders galloping on desolate trails, and cursed mining towns reflect the harsh realities of life during this time period. For example, accounts of haunted mining towns like Bodie, California, have been tied to the dangerous working conditions and high death tolls during the gold rush. Similarly, Native American beliefs about sacred lands disrupted by railroads and settlements, such as those explored in D. Brown's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, tell of vengeful spirits tied to the violent displacement of tribes. These stories blend folklore and superstition from many different cultures, mixed with the real dangers of the untamed, wild, wild West. All of these elements swirled together have created a haunting legacy where the desolation and tragedy of the past continue to echo in the eerie legends of the West that still persist today. One such of these now infamous legends that can still be heard in whispers carried by dusty desert winds of the Southwest is that of the Red Ghost. Natalia, have you ever heard of the Red Ghost?
No, Red Ghost.
Natalia, have you ever heard of the Red Ghost?
No, Red Ghost. Is this like Wild West, like racist kind of term?
No, but I started this story wanting to cover something from the Wild West because I feel like I haven't done many stories with the Wild West before. And I think it's a really intriguing time in history. And as I was looking into it, I was realizing that a lot of the legends that come out of the Wild West are kind of this amalgamation of a bunch of different cultures being forced to be together and trying to get along, sometimes not trying to get along, lots of violence. There's no sheriff you can call. In the story I'm about to tell you, there's no sheriff. And so a lot of people were self-policing, and a lot of people weren't policing at all. It was lawlessness. So there were lynchings, there were people shooting each other over property boundaries, there were people just taking people's land, where it's just a group of people and they're like, hey, we're squatting on this land, it's ours now. You went out to tend to your flock of sheep? Okay, guess you don't live here anymore. You come back to your house and there's nothing left for you anymore. So it's a really interesting time in history, and a lot of the ghost stories are tied in with the suffering of everybody during this time. It was just very chaotic.
It makes sense. I've actually heard, like in Old West movies where the sheriff comes in and there's like bad guys roll through town and the sheriff's like, y'all best be getting out of here before the sun goes down or whatever. I actually heard, and I don't know if this is accurate, you guys, so comment and tell me if I'm wrong. I heard that there was like an Old West kind of unwritten law, like treaty, that if newcomers came to a town, it was on the people who lived in the town to take care of those newcomers. So like until they like had their own place to stay and until they like had jobs and whatever, like everyone in the town kind of had to take care of those people until they could like start contributing themselves. It was like on the town to deal with it. And so when these people came through that didn't have anything, that were like, traveling, and they didn't seem like they could add value to the town, that's why the sheriffs would be like, y'all best be moving along before sundown, because the Old West like unwritten law was that if you spend the night in a town, that it's now the town's responsibility to take care of you.
Oh, that's
I don't know
interesting.
if that's true or not. And I don't think it was like a hospitality thing, like, ooh, we're going to take care of you because you can't take care of yourself. I think it was a thing of like every other town in the city being like, we don't want your fucking loser people who like don't add value to the town because everyone's like dying of syphilis and we're all hot and we all have to tend to whatever bullshit job we have every day. And we don't want anyone who's also not like on their grind, their hustle and grind 24/7 in our town.
It does seem very much like a dog-eat-dog world. There was no room for emotions. There was no room for, there's no sensitivity training as you're going out to mine or pan for gold in the creeks. You're not meeting with HR if you have a problem. Like, if there was racism, you're expected to, like, put up with it. If there's someone coming into your town, you either run them out of town or you take care of them. I think that actually makes a lot of sense to me, because a lot of the conflicts that were going on during the time of the Wild West had to do with how many people you had. Like, you could not win ever against a group of people that had more people than you. So I could see it being really valuable if there's a person coming into your town that is physically able-bodied and has some skills, whether it be shooting, hunting, agriculture, whatever. I could see them being really valuable to add into the mix as you're trying to get this town up and running, self-sufficient, and impermeable to whoever wants to come and try to take it away. Name 5 things that impact your sleep quality. Quick! 1. Alien abductions. 2. The Hat Man. 3. The Old Hag. 4. When you forget to turn Pitbull alerts off on your phone at night. And your nighttime bed temperature. Your nighttime bedroom temperature has a huge impact on your sleep quality, even if you don't realize it. If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Miracle Made sheets are inspired by NASA and use silver-infused fabrics that are temperature regulating so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. These sheets are infused with silver that prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets. Using silver-infused fabrics inspired by NASA, Miracle Made sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long, no matter the weather, so you get better sleep every night. They're also designed for your skin in mind. Stop sleeping on bacteria, which can clog your pores, causing breakouts and acne, and sleep clean with Miracle instead. Upgrade your sleep this year. Go to trymiracle.com/haunted to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code HAUNTED at checkout, you'll get a free 3-piece towel set and save an extra 20% off. Miracle is so confident in their product that it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/haunted and use the code HAUNTED to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/haunted to treat yourself. Thanks, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this week's episode. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting. All right, we're going to get into the story of the Red Ghost. The Wild West legend of the Red Ghost goes as follows. In 1883, 2 cattlemen left a ranch house near Eagle Creek, Arizona, setting off on horseback to tend to their livestock. Leaving their wives behind at the house, they ventured out into the pasture land to check on their cattle and conduct their nightly patrol. This practice was very common amongst cattlemen and cowboys as a measure taken to protect their herd against predators, both animal and human. Cattle rustling was a common problem in the Wild West, with thieves often targeting herds under the cover of darkness, driving away cattle to sell or use for themselves. Outlaws engaged in this practice would often stake out ranches for several nights at a time, observing each rancher's unique practices to determine the right time to strike. To prevent this, several ranchers and employees would often live on the same property and share 24-hour watch duties that would discourage any bandits that might be out there watching. So, with this context in mind, the 2 men set off into the night to begin their patrol, bravely protecting their cattle and property from harm. Now alone inside the home, the cattlemen's wives finished out the household chores and bade each other good night. As one of the women was just about to drift off to sleep, a loud, bellowing bark echoed from outside her window, shaking the window panes. This single bark soon erupted into a series of loud snarls and snapping growls and yelps. The meaning was unmistakable. The farm dog was alerting to the presence of intruders. Feeling exposed and alone in the absence of her husband, the woman leapt from her bed to her wardrobe, grabbing a rope to tie around her nightclothes as she raced to the front door. Her hand on the doorknob, she hesitated. Would it really be a smart idea to try to go out into the darkness on her own? She withdrew her hand. Thinking it would be safer to first look through one of the windows, she quietly crept toward the one nearest the front door, all the while the ferocious sound of the dogs reverberating throughout the house. Looking through the condensation forming on the glass of the living room window, the woman was greeted by a most horrific sight, a sight far too horrific for words. She screamed as she pushed herself involuntarily backwards, away from the window, falling on the floor and scooting her body as far away as she could from the window until her back was pressed against the wall. She continued to scream, covering her face in her hands. By this time, the other cattleman's wife had awoken and had come downstairs to see what was the matter. "What's going on?" she yelled, racing toward her friend. "Tell me, why are you screaming?" But her friend couldn't speak. She just kept wailing and wailing while the dog barked loudly outside. Finally, she raised a shaky finger pointing toward the window, but still she could not speak. The second woman turned, walked over toward that window, and pressed her face to the glass, squinting through the darkness, but she couldn't see anything. Gripping a shawl tightly around her shoulders, she opened the front door to get a better view, but still, there was nothing. It was far too dark to see. Leaning slightly over the threshold, her friend cried from the ground behind her, "Don't go!" "But what if my husband is in danger?" she replied. Bravely making her way down the front porch stairs, she cautiously followed the sound of the farm dog. As the barking grew closer, the woman prepared herself for the possibility of a predator. Finally, as she rounded the corner, her dog came into view. But the woman was not prepared for what she found her dog barking at. The horrible thing that the first woman had seen was there. A lumpy, reddish-brown beast, unlike anything she had ever seen before, reared up from the earth on 2 hoofed back legs. The clouds parted just slightly, and a single beam of moonlight illuminated what previously had been hidden. A grotesque skeleton cowboy with bones bleached white, a few chunks of flesh and hair still sagging rotten from its bones, sat atop the saddle on the beast, its legs and arms flailing in the night air. Frozen in fear, she could do nothing but scream. Back inside the house, the first woman could hear the second woman yelling from somewhere on the property. Finally getting up from where she had been cowering against the wall, she crawled to the front door that was now flapping in the wind, shutting and locking it. Frightened and sobbing, she stayed by the door until morning, reciting prayers and waiting for either her friend or the men to return home. Unfortunately, she would never again see her friend. And as the first rays of sunshine crept over the flat-topped mesas and the two men returned from their night watch, the first thing that they saw as they entered their property was the bloody, beaten, and trampled body of the second woman.
What? Okay, hold on. Let me summarize. So there's two women. They're in a house or a homestead or their neighbors, whatever. It's not relevant. One of them hears the dog barking, runs to go see what the dog's barking at. And then there's like a guy, like a dead man on a horse.
Basically, it's like the headless horseman lore of the UK that we talked about a couple seasons ago, where like every haunted house in the UK seems to have a headless horseman. It's like that, except for this guy has his head and he's rotten and grotesque. His bones are like shining in the moonlight, and he's on top. He's decaying, but he's not on a horse. He's on some sort of weird, lumpy, reddish creature that neither of these women are able to identify. And the first woman ends up being trampled to death by the creature.
How, like, I wish we knew how big this creature was, you know? I don't know, like, it's hard for me. Is it horse-sized?
Well, there's several different versions of the story depending on the source you read. Some of them differ in terms of what the creature looked like, and other details differ surrounding the two women and what they were doing and where they were when they saw it. So some say that rather than being in a fully constructed house, the women were in a temporary cabin-like structure on the property while they waited for their permanent settlement to get up and running. Some sources say that the second woman went outside after the dog began barking to see what it was barking at, while other sources say that the barking didn't start until after the second woman went outside, and that she actually went outside to get water from a nearby spring and then met with the creature incidentally. Some sources say that the two men saw the woman's trampled body immediately upon returning from night watch, while other sources say that they didn't go looking for her until after coming inside the house, where the remaining woman explained that she had seen the beast out the window. Some say that the two women were alone. Other sources say that the women were with children, and that explains why the second woman didn't go out after her friend, because she just heard screaming coming from outside and didn't want to leave the children alone in case it was like a bunch of bandits or coyotes. And then some describe the two women as sisters, while others say that they were just friends of circumstance, since their husbands worked together as new settlers in the area. And some people say it was, twice as big as a horse, the creature. Other sources say it was about the size of a horse, but wasn't a horse. So there's all of these different discrepancies, as you would expect in a time in history where it's not like people are necessarily writing down or investigating. Like I said, there's no sheriff in this story, so we kind of just have to take the woman's word for it, and then also we have to assume that whatever was passed down probably got changed a little bit as the story spread throughout surrounding homesteads. But whatever the case, newspapers at the time do report that this incident was real, with quotes describing the dead woman's body as being, quote, trampled and crushed as though a troop of cavalry had run her over, end quote. Large hoof prints were also reported as being observed at the scene by the men, along with a coroner who had been called in from the nearby town of Solomonville to document the scene and investigate it. The woman who had remained inside the home during the ordeal was eventually questioned during the investigation, with different sources attributing different quotes towards her. One publication says that the woman described the horrific red beast as being, quote, very tall and ridden by the devil himself. Another quote of her description is written as, quote, a huge reddish-colored beast ridden by a devilish-looking creature, end quote. An article published to the Mojave County Miner in 1893 writes, quote, "When the coroner came up from Solomonville, the only witness to the apparition testified and tried to describe it. She said it was red, very tall, and ridden by the devil. She could give no clearer description than this. She had only seen it for an instant and then covered up her face and prayed." The cause and manner of death was summed up by the coroner as simply death in some manner unknown to the jury, with many reportedly doubting the woman's account of the creature, wondering instead if she could have murdered her friend and was simply covering it up with an elaborate tale. Word of the incident spread quickly around the surrounding areas, and men in the area advised their wives to stay indoors at night, just in case the story of the unknown beast was true. So it's actually interesting that you brought up like this idea of you better get inside before dark in the beginning of this episode, because that's kind of what happened here. Like, we're not sure if this lady is lying. We don't know if she murdered her friend / sister, depending on the source. We don't know if she's covering up. Like, maybe her husband murdered her and then this lady is just being pressured to cover up because she doesn't want to be alone in the Wild West.
The story variation where like one of them is going to get water from a spring at night seems fake to me. I can't imagine anyone being so haunted that they like leave their scary ass little encampment in the middle of the Wild West. Like, there's no streetlights, and there's fucking animals out there that want to kill you. There's people out there that want to kill you. Like, you don't leave your house at night to go get a drink of water. You're gonna be thirsty until morning. Maybe she had just like had crazy sex and was like, I need a drink of water, like I'm so dehydrated, you know. I have no idea. I can't imagine what would possess you to go out there. Maybe she was drunk. That would make sense. If you were drunk, I feel like you would go, and I'm sure a lot of people at this time were drunk a lot.
Yeah, to deal with the conditions.
But also, like, you can't really fake trampling someone. I mean, how big was this woman? Because for someone to look like they got trampled by a horse, we're talking about broken ribs, we're talking about broken jaws, we're talking about broken legs, femurs. Like, you gotta look like a 1,000-pound or more animal wrecked you. And I can't see just like a woman being able to recreate that. Like, she can't like pick up a rock and throw it several times, you know, or maybe she did. I don't know. Maybe these women in the Wild West were like that hard, you know, like maybe they were just like fucking strong as fuck and like just powered by rage. I don't know. You would have to be built different to survive the Wild West.
Sure.
Yeah, so maybe that's what it was. Maybe they were just built different. And they're like, all right, I got to trample this girl because she got in my way tonight. I thought she was a murderer. Turns out I'm a murderer. Learned something new about myself tonight.
Now I got to make up a story about how the devil himself came into town on a weird, lumpy demon horse and killed her. Yeah, and I think if she was the only person, if she was the only witness, I do think she would have been put in jail probably eventually. But as we're about to find out, there were plenty more sightings of this creature that match her description. So a few weeks later, a group of Mexican prospectors were out in the wilderness panning for gold in a creek. They had been searching, somewhat unsuccessfully, for gold flakes and nuggets and had been camping nearby in tents. One evening as they slept, their tent suddenly collapsed in on them without warning. Scrambling awake, confused and frightened, they cut themselves out of the tent with a knife. Once free from their enclosure, they could hear the thundering hoofbeats of a galloping creature encircling them in the darkness. Suddenly, a terrible shriek pierced their ears as if the creature was emitting a war cry and getting ready to attack them. The men immediately ran away from their camp, climbing up the side of a hill to get to higher ground. Below them, they could just make out the silhouette of a beast of some kind, taller than 2 horses, tearing into the underbrush and out of sight. When morning came, the group of men made their way into the nearest town, where they told anyone who would listen what they had seen. Naturally, people were interested and set out to investigate, immediately wondering if it could be the same creature that had killed the cattleman's wife just weeks prior. Those that visited the scene of the tent attack described seeing strange tracks in the creek and mud that they could not immediately place. and visible signs of broken down brush in the area the prospectors said the beast had escaped through. Following the hoof prints for some time, the trail was eventually lost in an area where the brush ended and rocky hills began. Interestingly, caught on the broken branches along the path that the beast had seemed to gallop through, tufts of strange, long red hair was found, giving credence to the description that the rancher's wife had previously given of a red creature.
Okay, so I'm a horse girl. For the people who don't know, no time to explain. Just trust me, I am. I know that the horses that were in the Wild West were a lot smaller than like the horses that I ride. But even if you took two of those horses and stacked them on top of each other, it would still be way bigger than any horse that I ride. So I'm trying to think of what kind of animal would be two horses high that has red hair. I mean, these people weren't stupid. They knew the difference between like a cow and a horse, and
Yes.
yeah, they would see
They were
livestock all the
ranchers.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. That's so weird. It makes me think that it really is like a devil on a horse or something. Or it makes me wonder if back in the Wild West, there were other very, very small species of livestock that went extinct, because we know we hunted the buffalo to basically extinction, and there were tons of them. Like, they were overrun. They were like squirrels in suburbia at the time. So imagine if there was another sort of creature that was existing in the Wild West on the plains or in the desert that had way less numbers, and maybe there was only like a few hundred of them, you know? I
Right.
wonder.
And then they got extinct, like they got hunted to death by settlers that were desperate for food going through these unpopulated areas. It could be. So the reason why I spent some time in the intro talking about all the different types of people that were in this area at the time is because a lot of different types of people from different cultures, backgrounds, saw this creature. And they're all describing it exactly the same for the most part, which is interesting because usually we've talked about this before on our show when we talk about like cryptids and things like that. Sometimes it's understandable, oh, the person is misidentifying this creature and interpreting it as something from their local folklore. Or somebody is seeing a normal animal. They just don't understand what it is because they've never seen like a coyote with mange before, right? And so they're describing it as something different. But what's interesting is all of the people that are seeing this are pretty much on board. There's going to be some differences that we'll get to in a minute. But for the most part, it's this weird animal with a skeleton on its back that's just riding through all these different towns and causing havoc. Allie here, and it's time for a very sexy ad read. We're about to discuss lingerie, and honestly, it's about time. Who doesn't love wearing a cute set for a date or slipping on something sexy before bed? Mark Twain or somebody once said something like, "Love like you've never been hurt, dance like nobody's watching, and put on lingerie before bed in case you get abducted by aliens in your sleep." And wow, was he wise for that. Think about it. Do you want to be ushered into the next realm through a pure blue beam of light wearing a stained t-shirt and sweatpants with the crotch ripped out? Or would you like to ascend to the 12th dimension in a lacy black teddy with matching panties? I know what I'd choose. And lucky for you, this podcast episode is sponsored by Adore Me. If you've never heard of Adore Me, they make the cutest, most fun, flirty, and playful lingerie that is all about what gets you excited. Adore Me offers lingerie in over 67 different sizes, so you can ensure that you find the right size for your unique body. And they drop a new seasonal collection each month, so there's always new styles to check out. Whether you're looking for an everyday bra and panty set, lingerie, corsets, supportive swimwear, PJs, or even activewear, Adore Me has it all. My favorite swimsuit that I've ever owned comes from Adore Me, and I love that they have that extra support needed for people that have a little bit extra up top, you know? But enough about me. I want to talk to you about Natalia, my co-host on this show, because the number of text messages she sent me when she saw that this ad read was for my episode was astronomical. She really wants to make sure everybody knows how much she loves Adore Me. She keeps telling me, don't fuck this up. Don't fuck up this ad read. I will never forgive you. I fear for my life. Whether you're looking for a little excitement in your relationship, more comfortable bras that can help you feel confident in any outfit, or if you just want to feel good about yourself in a good bra and panty set, Adore Me has you covered. They even found a way to make lingerie that's actually comfortable so that you can love wearing your lingerie just as much as you love taking it off. And with bra and panty sets starting as low as $19.95, you can feel sexy even if you're on a budget. Now is the time to find comfortable lingerie that you'll love. Head to adoreme.com where new customers can get a bra and panty sets for as low as $19.95. Exude confidence and sexiness without spending a fortune. Again, that's adoreme.com where new customers can get bra and panty sets for as low as $19.95. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting. So again, I just wanted to point out that sources differ about this story, with some saying that the sighting by the prospectors actually took place before the woman was trampled to death, but that they didn't think to report it until after that story got popular and published in newspapers. But other sources say no, the incident with the prospectors definitely took place after the woman was trampled to death. And some also say that there's some dispute over how many miners there were on this expedition. Some say there were only 2, some say there was a big group. But again, whatever the case, there's enough documentation with this event to conclude that something really did happen here. But the rancher's wife and the gold prospectors wouldn't be the only witnesses to the beast. A multitude of stories began to spring up, each one more fantastic than the last. According to an 1893 newspaper article, quote, one man declared that he had pursued the beast to the edge of one of the precipices in that country and that the phantom never stopped, but galloped straight across the valley of Black River from one cliff to the other, half a mile, as easily as if the ground had been under his hoofs instead of 400 feet below him, end quote. Another article described a different incident wherein 2 freight wagons making the journey west had encountered a red monster 30 feet tall with large hooves that knocked down both wagons and left red hair at the scene. In another alleged sighting, a hunter described coming upon a scene deep in the wilderness where a tall, reddish, horse-like creature with a long neck and wild eyes was eating a grizzly bear while the grizzly was still alive.
Jesus.
The hunter described this hellish monster as being ridden by a demonic skeleton man. As the legend spread, the creature soon took on its own name, the Red Ghost, with several people reporting observing the phantom galloping on air as it crossed over the sky between cliffs and mesas to escape pursuit. A cowboy near Phoenix described seeing the Red Ghost on his property and successfully lassoing it about the neck. However, the cowboy said that this made the ghost angry, and it charged with such ferocity that he had to throw himself off of his horse to avoid being trampled in the collision.
Oh my God.
As the Red Ghost galloped off into the sunset, the cowboy could plainly see a skeleton rider seated atop it. Months later, a group of miners would have their own close encounter with the ghost, but unlike the prospectors before them, the group was armed with guns. Raising a battered rifle and aiming it at the grotesque beast as it charged them, one of the brave men took aim and fired. The whiz of the bullet soon met with a sharp, shattering sound, like a piece of pottery exploding in a kiln. The creature had not been hit, and a cloud of dust billowed as it made its escape. But the skeleton head of the rider had been shot from its body and now lay on the dirt, mouth agape with gray shriveled bits of skin and tufts of red hair still somehow clinging to the bone. In an 1893 article published to the Mojave County Miner, the next bit of lore associated with the Red Ghost reads as follows, quote, no one saw the uncanny beast for some weeks after this, but finally it appeared to the northward. One of the cowboys belonging to the Anchor J outfit rode up around dusk to an abandoned branding corral. There was something in the corral, and as he came up, the Red Ghost burst out of it, charging him and his horse. throwing the man and his horse to the ground as it galloped off once more. As the stories and legends grew more and more outrageous, opinion on what it could be grew as varied as the sightings themselves. Could it be the devil himself riding through the untamed desert wilderness? Could it be a Native American curse cast upon the settlers themselves? Was it a ghost, a demon, or a beast of the land? Luckily for us, in modern times, unlike most ghost stories covered on this show, the legend of the Red Ghost would finally be solved one fateful day in Salt River Country, Arizona, nearly a decade after his reign of terror first began. Before I tell you the final part of this legend, do you want to guess, Natalia, what you think the Red Ghost might be? Or maybe just maybe we can talk through the options of what it might be?
Yeah, okay, so in my brain I was trying to figure out what kind of animal this is. Because one guy said it could walk on air, and I don't know if that guy was just on Wild West fucking
kerosene,
kratom
just
or
chugging
something.
kerosene.
Yeah, I don't know if he was on the equivalent of meth for the Wild West. I think they just had meth, right? Yeah.
Snorting poison from a frog or something. I don't know, whatever animals they had there.
Yeah, so maybe he was an outlier, so I'm ignoring him. But I was trying to think from a horse girl perspective, what does this animal want, right? If we think this is a real animal, it's not a cryptid or something. It's a beast, right? It seems to be really aggressive. The fact that someone lassoed it and its instinct wasn't to run away, its instinct was to run and charge the guy who lassoed it, tells me that it's not a typical herd animal like a cow or a deer or a horse. It's got to be something else that's aggressive and charges. And I can't think of something that would match that description that lived in the Wild West. And I was thinking, okay, maybe it was a dead cowboy. Maybe he was on the saddle, but then I was how is he stuck to the horse? Because when you're riding a horse that's charging around, or a beast that's charging around, you got to use all your muscles to stay on and be balanced. So if you're dead, literally dead weight, you would just flop off of there. And then I was well, maybe he tied himself to the saddle. Maybe the guy... then I started going real crazy, started making all kinds of backstories. I was maybe this guy was an outlaw, and he got in a fight, and he knew he was going to go unconscious, and he was bleeding out, and so he tied himself to the animal and was I know this animal is going to take me back to a town, and someone somewhere is going to help me, because it's better than just dying on the ground here in the middle of nowhere, So maybe it was his last ditch effort, and then so that's what it is. But I don't know what kind of animal it would be. I can't think of an animal that behaves that way, that's that big.
It's very confounding. And when I read what it was, I for sure thought it was fake. I was there's no fucking way. And then I started reading more about it, and I was oh, wow, I did not realize that, and I'm an American. So let me tell you the ending to the legend of the Red Ghost. The story of the Red Ghost ends with a man named Mizzou Hastings, a rancher who grew turnips above a gold prospecting camp. Can we just acknowledge that sounds fake?
I know, that sounds really
That's
fake.
a Shel Silverstein poem. Mizzou Hastings grew turnips above a gold prospecting camp.
What are those things where it has a bunch of blanks and you just fill in different
Mad
nouns or
Libs?
Yeah, it sounds like a Mad Lib.
It really does. But apparently this is a real guy, and his name, and there are quotes from him in old Wild West newspaper articles. I guess he's real. One morning, he awoke in his cabin to find something strange in his turnip patch. He took aim with his gun and fired, dropping the animal in one shot. Walking closer, he could plainly see the Red Ghost and could tell exactly what it was. A camel, knotted and scarred with rawhide strips that had been on him for so long that some of them had cut deeply into the flesh of the camel, creating thick scars that from a distance might render the animal completely unrecognizable. It was covered in the reddish dirt of the Arizona earth, and there was definitely something affixed to its back. Inspecting closer, Hastings saw leg bones. the flesh rotted away and the bones bleached by the hot desert sun. The man's remains were securely tangled and practically cemented from years of baking to the creature. Mizzou Hastings alerted the coroner, and word spread like wildfire that the red ghost had finally been caught. Witnesses flocked to the turnip patch for a chance to see it themselves, and the mystery of the red ghost was finally solved. Except for one small detail. Who could the man have been? And what was a camel doing in Arizona?
Yeah.
Over the years, many have endeavored to answer the question of how the man came to be lashed to the camel, but there is no definitive conclusion about this. Wikipedia suggests that he might have been a prospector dying of thirst who tied himself to the back of the camel, hoping it would bring him to water, or that it may have been a soldier learning to ride a camel when it suddenly bolted off. An 1893 article asks, quote, "Now everybody down in that country is wondering whether the man was tied on there Mazeppa fashion for deviltry or revenge, whether it was some lunatic's hideous scheme of suicide or merely an ugly piece of humor of somebody who had a camel and a corpse for which he had no use."
Yeah, what is a camel doing in the Wild West? Like, what would you use that for? This time period was so difficult to survive in, you know, and to have any sort of livestock, it needed to have a use, whether that's to eat, whether that's to breed, to sell, and I just don't know what they would use a camel for then.
So that's the first question, right? What is a camel doing here? The second question is, why is there a dude's skeleton lashed to the camel? So let's start with the first question, which is, what is the camel doing here? This is the part that I was like, I feel so stupid that I didn't know this. I am American, was born in America in the West, and I have never fucking heard of this before. Natalia, did you know that in the mid-19th century, the United States Army embarked on an unconventional experiment, this is according to Encyclopedia Britannica, known as the Camel Corps, aiming to utilize camels as pack animals in the arid terrains of the American Southwest?
Wow, no, I didn't know that. But that kind of makes sense because they were thinking, okay, over in places like Saudi Arabia, where it's like a bunch of desert, people use the camels and they don't need a lot of water. They don't need a lot. So they can go really far distances. They can like eat cactus. So yeah, maybe it does seem like a good idea to try to make like a cavalry out of them. But yeah, I haven't heard of the Camel Corps.
It sounds fake. It sounds like a Mad Lib. Like, the Camel Corps, it's too perfect. So these animals were imported aboard the USS Supply, which was a ship, and they were imported from Egypt, Turkey, and Tunisia in 1856. And the initiative was started by then Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, who in 1855 secured a $30,000 appropriation from Congress for the project of getting the Camel Corps up and running. So they were taken from Egypt, Turkey, and Tunisia, loaded onto the USS Supply, and then arrived in Texas in May of 1856. Wow. The camels were stationed at Camp Verde, Texas, where they underwent rigorous testing to assess their suitability for military logistics, which is so... Oh my God, why has a children's cartoon not been made out of this? Because I'm just imagining a camel wearing night vision goggles. I know they didn't have that back then, but like a camel with night vision goggles and like a bulletproof vest is just like learning to jump out of an airplane and parachute down. Like, it's perfect. It's amazing.
I'm just picturing like the most stubborn, angry, lanky, awkward animal that like you have like a bunch of people trying to get them to move in sync together and, you know, train them, and they just like don't give a fuck, and they're just like reaching behind, biting the person that's on their back. I mean, a horse that doesn't want you to ride it is like a bitch. I've been on one before. They like reach behind you and bite your feet and stuff, and you're like, all right, fuck this horse, I'm not riding this anymore, like, goodbye, you know?
Yeah.
And so I can imagine a camel being so much worse to deal with, like if they don't want you on them. And didn't you say that this camel had like, it was like tied up, right?
Yeah.
It had been tied up and I guess had escaped, and like all the ropes that were on it had just like festered and grown into its skin.
Yeah, because this is 10 years of sightings of the red ghost. And so all of that time just wandering through the desert, this camel was not in its natural environment. Usually when you see a camel, it would be in a place like we just mentioned, Egypt, Turkey, Tunisia, and it would be in sand, like desert sand that's very, very different from the red earth of Arizona. So you normally wouldn't see a camel covered in like red dirt and mud. So it was totally covered, caked through, not being taken care of, had all of these leather lashings tied around it that were basically baking into its skin. The leather like materials had also grown so deep into the skin that it had created all these weird like keloids and scars. So if you were looking at it and you weren't familiar with a camel, you would also be like, what is this? You know, it has like these big welts. It has a saddle on it. So in your head, you're thinking, well, I know what a horse is, but it's not a horse. It's lumpy and it has a long neck and weird eyes and it's angry. And there's just some dead skeleton man lashed to it that's not popping off no matter how much the camel is bucking and killing people and running people over and trampling things. And then finally the head pops off at some point and it either gets shot off. Sources differ. Some say it got shot off. Some say it just jostled loose finally. But now this is like the first concrete evidence that they have, like, it's real. It's not just an urban legend. This is a real beast. Like, we have the devil's head.
What about the guy that saw it like cross through the air on a canyon?
That guy,
he was
for
just
sure.
wrong.
He was for sure drunk on something. Like, he's for sure just making up a story. I also wonder too, like, you know, this is pre-television. There's not much to do. You're kind of on your own. A lot of these people were hermits. So there's not much to do, you know? So maybe it's just the campfire stories and the legends that came out of living such a difficult life and being bored and miserable resulted in these super tall tales. Like Paul Bunyan or whatever is a really famous tall tale. It seems like some of these people were just spinning a yarn.
Relevant.
Yeah. But also what's interesting about these camels that were incorporated into the Camel Corps is there were only 33 of them. So there weren't that many. And they were brought to Texas in 1856. They were stationed at Camp Verde in Texas. They were assessed to see which ones were going to be the most suitable to carry heavy loads over long distances with minimal water intake. And in 1857, this guy named Edward Fitzgerald Beale was commissioned to survey a wagon road from a place in New Mexico to a territory along the Colorado River, and he took 25 of those 33 camels on his expedition, and all 25 survived and in fact exceeded his expectations. And so he was really excited about this and was like, great, we have something other than mules, because horses were kind of expensive and also not well suited for super hard labor in rough conditions. Horses, as I'm sure you can attest to, they have a personality and they, you know, sometimes they want to do what they want to do. And so mules and camels were considered better for taking lots of items on top of the animal. That's why they're called pack animals.
Like a pack animal. Yeah, and I know they still kind of do that. Like you can go on hikes through Montana and stuff with llamas or camels or mules where they just carry all your camping equipment and then they like follow you on the trail, which I always thought was like kind of cool, but also like if you got one that was in a bad mood, you would just be totally fucked because they would just run off with all your stuff.
Yeah, which is kind of what makes it so impressive that all 25 of the camels he brought on this first expedition exceeded his expectations, and it was like a great success.
They were like, this is way better than where we just came from. Like, this is 100%. This is like a paradise. It was like Hawaii to them.
Yeah, there's a river. There's a creek.
A creek, like, whoa, this is amazing. Wow, look at all this cactus. Like, we can eat. Oh my god, we made it. Like, this is the promised land.
Right. Now, but here's where things start to go kind of south with the Camel Corps, because obviously we don't still have a Camel Corps and there are no wild camels anymore in the United States. Well, there were never any wild camels, but you know, like the escaped camels from the Camel Corps they don't persist into the modern flora and fauna. So when the Civil War broke out in 1861, a lot of attention was taken away from some of this this mapping of different Western territories with camels. And so they decided, hey, we're going to use these camels and give them to soldiers because these will be really great in wartime as well. However, soldiers didn't have a lot of time during the Civil War to get up to speed on how to handle a camel, and there were even less people that already knew how to handle a camel. And so a lot of these soldiers were getting trampled by their camels or getting bucked from their camels or falling off, losing their camels. The camels would be like running away from them. It was just total chaos. So the army eventually abandoned the experiment. And by 1864, many of the camels that existed in that initial group of 33 were sold at auction or released into the wild. And this is according to the U.S. Army's own website. So this is not like fake made up urban legend from the region. And in the years following the dissolution of the Camel Corps, sightings of feral camels were reported across the Southwest from Texas to California, and some of them even got incorporated into local legends such as the Red Ghost of Arizona. And the experiment, even though it was relatively short-lived, remains a fascinating chapter. This is according to nps.gov. They look back fondly on this. They're like, wow, wasn't this so innovative of us to take 33 camels for $30,000 to the U.S. to transport mail and give to soldiers, and then they all just, eventually died off. Isn't that such a wonderful footnote in history? But something even more interesting, I think, there's a whole monument in Arizona of a giant camel, and it's a monument to this guy whose nickname was High Jolly. Have you ever heard of High Jolly?
No.
His real name is Philip Tedrow, and he was born in 1828 in Turkey. He was of Greek and Syrian descent. And after converting to Islam and completing a pilgrimage to Mecca, he decided that he wanted to change his name to Haji Ali, which got mispronounced by Americans as High Jolly when he was recruited by the U.S. Army in 1856 to come to the Camel Corps. So when they were going around all these different countries looking for camels, again, like I said, there is nobody from the U.S. that had experience with camels. As they're going into this experiment, they're like, we need a camel driver. We need a guy who knows a camel through and through. I can come to the U.S., is willing to leave it all behind, come to a whole new country and teach us what he knows about camels. And High Jolly was the guy. He was like, yep, I'm on board. I'm coming on the ship. I'm coming with these 33 camels. I'm going to be part of the Camel Corps. And he led camels on a multitude of excursions. He taught people how to use the camels. And when the Camel Corps was eventually disbanded, he didn't return to his original country of origin. He just decided that he was going to stay living in the Southwest, in the American Southwest. And so he did kind of a little bit of everything. He did prospecting, scouting, transporting goods, and he remained with a few camels that had been released from the Camel Corps and just used them to help him with all of his various trades that he did. And he lived until 1902. He passed away in a town called Quartzsite in Arizona, and to honor his contributions to the American Southwest, because he was responsible for so much mail delivery, prospecting, helping people make it through different areas. And remember, he's not even from here. That's how much of a badass this guy was. He could not be from a country further removed from the United States, but he was that dude. People really respected him, and he has his own monument now. It's a pyramid, and it has a metal silhouette of a camel, and it's called a monument to High Jolly's legacy. So I'm going to send it to you right now. It's me, Allie, here to talk to you about nutrition. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who am I to speak to you about nutrition? I, the person who starts every single live stream by showing you how many pieces of candy I purchased for the said live stream. But I'm really trying to change my ways this year, and I'm doing that through the help of this week's sponsor, Factor. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. Looking to lose weight? You can lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with Factor Keto meals. Based on a randomized controlled clinical trial with Factor Keto, results will vary depending on diet and exercise. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. Choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. I personally use Factor for their smoothies and juices. They are so delicious. The juices I take with me to work on the go. It's a really easy way to make sure I'm getting the nutrients that I need. As a person who typically eats just Laffy Taffy all day, I also gifted a subscription to my sister-in-law, and it made me look really cool and considerate. So if you're trying to figure out a gift to get somebody with young children or somebody with a super busy lifestyle, I definitely recommend gifting them Factor. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Factor Podcast and use code Factor Podcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code Factor Podcast at factormeals.com/Factor Podcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting. So this monument to him is also his tomb. I'm actually going to send you the TripAdvisor link.
That is something strange about Arizona, is there's like famous grave sites. Like you'll be on the highway and it'll be like, exit here to see old man Sam's grave, you know? And it's like a place people go. And I just, that is interesting. Okay, let's see what you sent me. Oh, this is interesting. A pyramid of like a bunch of rocks on top of each other, and then it looks like it has a metal plaque. Yeah. Oh, he has his own cemetery, High Jolly Cemetery. Yeah, it says this pyramid of native stone marks the resting place of High Jolly, a Greek born in Syria, also known as Philip Tedro and Haji Ali. High Jolly was hired in 1857 as a camel herder in the U.S. Army's short-lived historic Camel Corps by Lieutenant Edward E. Beale. It says, in 1861, the Civil War commenced, ending the day of the Camel Corps. High Jolly returned to quartzsite, trying his hand at mining, packing, scouting, and delivering jackass mail and selling water to travelers. That's interesting. Jackass mail, like, yeah, I guess like before the Pony Express, it would be like mules and stuff. This is cool. What an interesting part of American history that is very, very full of adventure, but then you look at it and it just looks like dust and like
dust and gross. Yeah, so yeah. I just sent you some illustrations that have come out of this urban legend that are pretty cool. Like they're pretty metal, if you want to describe them to the audience.
Yeah, these are awesome. If you want to see these images, go to @Let'sGetHaunted on Instagram. But yeah, the first one is a hand-drawn illustration, and it looks like a big dog with mange, this camel.
Yeah.
And I can see there is a skeleton on its back, and I can kind of see how you wouldn't know it was a camel because like the body of the skeleton has sort of fused with the camel and it's covering up those humps. So like to me, those humps on a camel are what make it like a camel, you know? That's right. What you think of when you think of camel. And so if there's a guy sitting between those two, it doesn't look like a camel because the humps are hidden. It looks like a beast. Yeah, the second one is it's a camel and it looks really angry. They've drawn it with like red eyes and a red nose, and there's a skeleton on its back. And then yep, the last one, it looks like a beast, like an angry camel with a skeleton on its back emerging from a red dust storm. It is pretty metal. You know, I feel like this camel needs their own like tomb site or monument, because I feel bad for that camel. It was just like had totally fuck you vibes. You know, he like never gave up. He was like, I'm here, I'm in the Wild West, I'm gonna do me.
Yeah.
No matter what.
No, for sure. He was an icon. Like a camel that is just trampling people's gold prospecting campsites, trampling people, which is like, you know, it's not cool that someone died out of this, but like if you're a camel that has been lashed by an inexperienced soldier, perhaps if we agree with that theory, then maybe you don't have the best experience with people, and so you don't want them anywhere near you. It's not like it was its fault that it got lashed and had like a weird rotting corpse on its back. And it was just like, it was really a metal camel. And I do wish that there was a grave site for it, but unfortunately there's not. I don't know what they did with the corpse after they shot it. I'm sure they must have burned or buried it, but there's no plaque to mark that monument. But if you think the red ghost is the only ghostly tale of a phantom beast to spring from this time in history, you'd be wrong. There's one more quick legend about a ghost camel that I was able to find that I want to tell you about now. Author Kathy Weiser Alexander wrote about this paranormal encounter for legendsofamerica.com, saying, though the abandoned beasts of the Camel Corps freely roamed the American Southwest for decades, they soon died off and disappeared from the landscape altogether. The last credible sighting of camels in America came from 1907 and 1934. In 1907, a prospector reported that he had seen 2 wild camels in Nevada. But it wasn't until April of 1934 that the Oakland Tribune wrote an article that, quote, "The last American camel is dead." The article describes a feral camel left over from the Camel Corps who had been seen by many people over the years roaming the deserts of Arizona. The camel, dubbed Topsy by locals, was last seen trekking across the deserts of Arizona into California, finally arriving in Los Angeles. She was eventually captured and transported to Griffith Park Zoo to live out the rest of her days until she unfortunately developed paralysis and had to be put down. With the death of Topsy, it seemed that all the real army camels had finally passed. However, a few ghost stories involving camels, including that of the Red Ghost, continued to linger in Arizona in particular. One of these legends tells the story of a prospector named Jake, who had purchased 3 camels from the army at public auction. According to the story, when Jake bought the camels, he was warned by the soldiers that the beasts were stubborn, ornery, quick to anger, and unable to be tamed. Undeterred, Jake spent years meticulously caring for his camels and bonding with them. One of the 3 camels in particular developed a deep and meaningful bond with Jake, and he was known to take the animal with him on trips into the mountains to look for gold. One fateful day, while Jake was prospecting deep in the Arizona desert, his pickaxe struck something shiny. Could it really be? Jake wondered as he brushed dirt off the object to get a better look. It was! Jake had struck pay dirt, finding a whole cavern with walls full of gold. Filling the satchels lashed to his beloved camel with as much gold as he could, he headed back into town to grab more supplies and more camels so that he could continue mining the gold. However, when he reached the town, night was already falling, so Jake made the fateful decision to wind down for the evening at a local saloon. After knocking back a few drinks, Jake began to tell anyone who would listen about his incredible find, bragging to all that he had finally struck gold after so many years of searching. Unfortunately for Jake, in the crowd was a man named Paul Adams, who quietly listened to the story of the treasure with much interest. When Jake finally left his home the next morning to return to his gold mine, he had no idea that Paul was following him the whole way. Even though Jake was unaware of Paul's presence, he wasn't a dummy. He made sure to take different routes, often doubling back on the same path he had already gone down so as to throw off any would-be robbers who might be lurking in the shadows. Though he was careful and took a long and roundabout route, Paul Adams was undeterred and patiently followed behind him. When Jake stopped to set up camp for the night, Paul, thinking that he had finally been led to the mine's location, crept up and murdered Jake in cold blood. Trying to protect his owner, Jake's favorite camel turned to attack Paul. In a frenzy to save his own life from the heavily hoofed beast, Paul shot and killed the camel with his gun, but not before the camel had bitten and taken a chunk out of Paul's arm. Wounded and bleeding, but still determined, Paul began to search in earnest for Jake's mine for nights on end. Until, on the last night of his search, the ghost of Jake, riding upon the dead camel, approached Paul's camp, letting out a terrifying screech before rearing up on its back legs, kicking its hooves into the moonlight. Terrified, the legend goes that Paul was chased by Jake atop the ghost camel all the way into town, straight into the sheriff's office. Frightened beyond belief, Paul Adams then made a full confession. Whether the ghost of Jake and his loyal camel continue to roam the desert is currently unknown. Now, okay, so
camel.
RIP, pour one out for the camel, pour out some water for the camel. But so we said, before I told you about the Camel Corps, I said there were 2 questions, right? 1, what was the camel doing in Arizona? So we just answered that. 2, who was this guy? And we've never learned who this guy was. Obviously, this is
The
before
skeleton on the camel.
Yeah, that was a real skeleton. It wasn't a fake skeleton. That was somebody. And so the only clue we have, which isn't very good, is just whatever was published in the newspaper at the time. And the newspaper at the time proposed a couple of different ideas about who it could be. They said maybe it was someone tied to the camel in a Mazeppa fashion for deviltry or revenge. Have you ever heard of Mazeppa?
Well, but is this like, where you piss someone off and they tie you to a camel and like spank the camel and have it run off into the distance?
Basically,
So you die of exposure, I guess?
Yeah, basically. So Mazeppa is a narrative poem written by the English romantic poet Lord Byron in 1819. It's a popular legend about the early life of Ivan Mazeppa, who later became a military leader of Ukraine. So it is interesting that even in the late 1800s, like people in the American Southwest know about Mazeppa. I guess in this story, which I've never read, so people feel free to chime in the comments. I guess in this story, somebody gets punished by being lashed to a horse. And it's so embarrassing and humiliating for some reason. I feel like that's not humiliating. That's just fucking weird that you thought to do that. They're like, oh, this is going to really be so embarrassing for this guy that his corpse is like lashed to a horse. Like, he's dead, bro. I don't know why they were so focused on it was like a humiliation ritual. But so that's one of the ideas is maybe this guy.
It was definitely more for them than the guy.
If we agree with that theory, that this was somebody who pissed somebody off and then as their punishment was murdered and tied to the camel or incapacitated and tied to the camel, this person would have to have experience with camels, right? If we believe that this person whose corpse and skeleton were later found tied to this feral camel, if we believe that that person pissed somebody off and somebody else tied him there, whether alive or dead, it doesn't really matter. If somebody else put him there, then that person who put him there probably would have needed experience with a camel or access to a camel. I mean, I guess not necessarily. There are people who break wild horses, and maybe they don't have a lot of experience with horses, but I feel like that's an outlier. I feel like you have to have some experience.
Okay, so my horse girl knowledge is telling me if this camel had like a bunch of really tight ropes on it, maybe they tied the camel down. Like they lassoed the camel and just like hog-tied its legs, tied it down really, really tight, put this guy on it, tied the guy really tight on it, and then, cut the ropes, and the camel was just so pissed it got up and ran.
That's true. Right? That's true. Okay, so maybe not necessarily they needed to be somebody who had access to a camel. They could have just like a camel maybe got trapped in their corral. Like that one guy who came upon the red ghost where he was like, there's an abandoned corral over here and there's something in it. Let me go see what it is. That's one idea, is that maybe this guy was forcibly tied to this camel, whether alive or dead, because he pissed somebody off. And certainly there's no shortage of people that were pissing people off during the Wild West. So it could have been someone who didn't even necessarily do anything wrong, but maybe abandoned.
You were just in a foul mood.
Yeah.
I feel like most of the people would be like on the edge. Like you're just looking for someone to piss you off. Like you're like, please fucking come at me, bro, so I can tie you to a camel and send you off to your death, because I just don't give a fuck anymore and I need to feel alive.
Yeah, like, or I want your stuff. Maybe it was a squatter. Maybe it was somebody that was dying of thirst and they weren't going to be allowed into the town, and somebody came up to them and was like, you best be on your way. And it was like, this is the last straw. If I don't kill this person and take what they have, I'm going to die.
Does seem though like extra step. Like, if you just wanted to kill someone and take their stuff, why not just kill them? Like, you tying down a wild feral camel and then strapping them to it and sending it away seems like just a hair unhinged, like serial killer vibes, right?
For sure. But then also, to play devil's advocate, the Wild West is called the Wild West because it was characterized by a lack of formal law enforcement in many areas. So people would often resort to their own extrajudicial actions. Like, they would decide what they wanted to do with somebody. So, you know, that's how people got away with lynchings, which is horribly grotesque and serial killer shit. But people did it. Tarring and feathering, that was horrific as well. That wasn't just about humiliation. Like, people's skin would burn, third-degree burns, and they would later die of having so much of their body burned by this hot tar and being feathered. There was public shaming. There were people put in stocks. And all of this stuff was going on at that time because it was the Wild West. So maybe it's honestly impressive that only one guy was tied to a camel and ran, set off into the sunset, compared to all of the other dangerous, unusual forms of punishment that were going on at the time. Okay, then that newspaper article that I read to you earlier from 1893, other idea that the author had was maybe it was, quote, some lunatic's hideous scheme of suicide. I feel like that's very improbable.
Yeah, I think I'm able to rule that one out.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know how you would look at that and be like, this makes sense for suicide. I'm going to somehow lash myself to an angry feral camel so tightly that my corpse will eventually fuse with it and die of exposure as the camel's bucking around. Like, it seems like too many steps. And then the last idea that the article had was, quote, an ugly piece of humor of somebody who had a camel and a corpse for which he had no use.
That makes sense to me, though, kind of. It's the middle of nowhere. Like, the stuff I would do at the barn, like growing up in Oklahoma, literally, there's nothing to do. It's like no one does cell phones. There's no like social media. Like, there's nothing to do. We would do weird shit all the time, like with the horse, like just to see what happened, you know? Because you want to see how they react to stuff. So you would like go tie it to a tree and like run off and like watch from a distance just to see what he's going to do. And it never was good. Like, they would just break their halter and lead and run back to their stall. But like, being a kid, you were like, ooh, this is interesting.
I mean, that's true. So maybe an outlaw that comes across a grave and decides they want to dig up the person to see if they're like a grave robber, right? Like, maybe there's some jewelry in this grave and now they've just got a weird skeleton with a little bit of red hair. Like you said, people resort to weird things when they're very bored, which we know people were.
Maybe it was a way to like throw someone off your trail, right? Like, this will be a distraction. I'm going to tie a guy to this camel, spank the camel, have the camel run off in the opposite direction. Whoever's chasing me or looking for me is going to be confused by these tracks leading away from where I am. You know?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it could be. And then there's also just two other ideas that we said earlier that we just haven't talked about yet is maybe it was a prospector that tied himself. You said this earlier, like maybe somebody tied themselves to a horse before you knew it was a camel. You were like, maybe somebody tied themselves to the horse because they were dying and they just were hoping the horse would take them home or take them to get help. And it was kind of the last ditch effort to not be abandoned in the middle of the wilderness in the desert. It could be that. It could also be a soldier. I mean, I think if it were a soldier, there would be remnants of a Civil War uniform, I would imagine, because they said it sounds like there were bits of cloth still attached to the skeleton.
Well, it would be like an army issued saddle and tack and stuff too. Like, they would be able to figure that out.
True. Yep. So that is the story of the Wild West legend of the Red Ghost. And I do want to give a special shout out to Lily Bones on Reddit. I saw this posted to r/urban myths this year. And then I was like, oh, that'd be a cool story to cover. But I don't know if it's really supernatural since there's an explanation. But then Lily Bones recommended it in our subreddit. And I was like, you know what? This story's cool as fuck. We're going to cover it anyway. So thank you, Lily Bones.
It is cool. And I think that this is nice. Like, we're getting back to the original meaning of haunted when we started this podcast, which was like chaos. Allie and I have been going through like all of our old episodes, trying to catalog them because we've been putting them in our story highlights on Instagram. And we're like, where do we put like Some of these stories, like doppelgangers, like that's not a ghost. It's not a cryptid. It's not like
An alien.
an alien, right? Like it's where do we put this? And same with like disaster, like plane crashes, survival stories. Like where do those go? I don't know. They're haunted, but where do they go? No one knows. Right. And I like this story because it's another one of those stories and it was really, really fun. And I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time. And I feel like it is such an interesting legend, I guess, because it's like just the visual is so nice of a skeleton on a camel charging at you. It's great.
It's also,
It's really nice.
it is sort of refreshing to have a story where you can't simply explain it away by someone's imagination. So even though we do love a good mystery on the show and we do love not knowing what something was, because that can be kind of fun too, to let your imagination run wild, to not have a conclusion. It was kind of refreshing to have a conclusion in this story because sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. It would actually, to me, it would be less surprising if there was just the devil was hanging out in this area, or a ghost of a horrifically murdered person was galloping on their horse and it just looked weird. I don't know. To me, having done this show now, we've done this for 7 seasons now. To me, that would be like, okay, yeah, that's what it was. But the fact that we had a camel corps, and I didn't know that, we had camels imported from Egypt, and a guy from Turkey that was like, sure, I'll come and start a whole new life. Like, that is crazy to me. And I just love it. And there is still an air of mystery because we don't know who this person was that was tied to the camel. And maybe one day we'll figure it out. Natalia, final thoughts before you give your sign off?
I love this story. I'm so interested because it's like one of those stories that's like almost inspiring. Like you want to trace it back. Like I want to Indiana Jones this shit and figure it out because it is a mystery. Like why was this guy on this camel? What happened? Great story.
I need somebody to write some fan fiction and send it into us with a whole backstory of how this guy got on this camel, because I cannot believe
bestiality stuff, guys.
No. Oh
Okay.
God, no. Oh my God, no. We'll block you. But yeah, I just can't believe this hasn't been turned into a movie yet or a play. Like this is just, I just love Old West legends. Are you ready to give our sign off?
BRB, gonna go get high licking frogs in the wild, wild west, and then get on my camel and gallop off into the sunset.
Bye. Sources for this week's episode include Wikipedia's entry on the Red Ghost, an article published to azcentral.com entitled "This is the Ultimate Arizona Ghost Story" by Ron Dungan, an article published to armyhistory.org entitled "The U.S. Army's Camel Corps Experiment" by Vince Hawkins, an article published to guardianlv.com entitled "High Jolly and the Legend of the Red Ghost" by Michael Smith, an article from February 25th, 1893, published to the Mojave County Miner, which I accessed via newspapers.com, entitled "The Phantom That Terrified All Arizona for a Time," and an article on the Red Ghost and the story of Jake and the Ghostly Camel, published by Kathy Weiser Alexander to legendsofamerica.com, and anything else I may have cited during the episode. Hey Haunties, it's time for closing credits. This year, we're shouting out our Patreon donors 2 months after their initial donation and continuing to shout them out each month that their subscription is active. That means that this month, which is February of 2025, we are finishing up shouting out our donors from December of 2024. If you'd like to become a donor, head over to patreon.com/Let's Get Haunted and sign up now for Tier 1 or Tier 2 to hear yourself shouted out on a future episode. Right now, our pinned post on the Patreon is a video you can watch explaining exactly how the shoutouts work And for a limited time, you can sign up for the annual subscription where you get to shout yourself out in your own voice, and you get 12% off your entire year's subscription. This week, we'd love to give a heartfelt shout out to Frank D, Fred H, Freddie F, Fresh Zombie, Gathy with a G, Ghost of 7-Eleven, Grace K, Grace M, Grandma Painter, Greg A, Haley C, Hallie L, Haley L, Hannah B, Hannah M, Hannah VR, Hannah RK, Haley G, Haley A, Hexylvania Snow, Hugo A, Ileana RN, Ileana RN, Inky Pop Art, It's Kelsifer, Ivan L, Yvonne L, Jackie L, Jacob, JDKP, Jameet, Jamie F, Jamie P, Jasmine B, Jasmine C, Jason G, JM, Jamie L, Jen M, Jenna M, Jennifer C, Jennifer I, Jennifer W, Jenny B, Jenny Squiddy, Jim H, Joey and Jesse, Joanna H, Joaquin E, Jocelyn, Jordan F, Jordan L, Jordan B, Jose El Krampus P, Jose P, Josie J, Joy B, Jules the Ghoul again, Julia C, Julia M, Julie B, Julie C, Juliet H, Justin M, Justine D, Kate M, Kato L, Kaido L, Comma N, Kama N, Karen H, Karen K, Carly K, Carly M, Kat and Alice the Malice, Katie Cat, Katie O, Katie T, Kate to the Win, Kayla M, Kayla P, aka Kayak, Keese P, Kelsey K, Kelsey L, Kelsey H, Kendra, Kimberly F, Kindred and Amber, Kinsley M, Kittenish Kate, Corky M, Corey with a K, Kristen K, Lacey M, Laura the Lauren, Lauren B, Lori, Lowry, Elsie Fitz, Leah R 1991, Leanna BC, Lena, Lena, Lexatronic, Lil Dilda, Lily Bones, Lily C, Lily Bell, Lily Silly, Lindsay G, Lindsay L, Lindsay M, Lindsay S, Lisa Bone, Lisa H, Lisa ML, Lobster, Mad Nej, Madeline, Maddie P, Madison E, Madison M, Maja L, Mac, McKenna P, Maria O, Marina W, Mario A, Maris G, Marissa G, Mars, Marty F, Mary A, Matt M, Mateo NL, Matthew L, Matthew M, Maddie C, Maddie Joe, Max M, Mason G, Meg R, Meg T, Mega Lantern, Megan M, Megan N, Mega Red, and Megan D. Thank you guys so much. Nat and I have so many big plans for 2025. We want to redo our studio. We want to upgrade her audio equipment. We want to upgrade our recording software to make it easier on ourselves. We would love to get to a place where we can start hiring an editor full time to work on all of our episodes so that we can just focus on writing and researching. And every single patron who subscribes to our Patreon supports us monetarily, whether that's through Patreon, sharing our episodes, buying something from one of our sponsors, or just streaming us. Every little step that you guys take to support us is so helpful. You have no idea. Nat and I have to sit in on meetings. We have to talk to our advertisers. We try to talk to other podcasts to see how we're measuring up with them. And we would not be able to do any of the things that we have been able to do without the help of you guys. The majority of the money that we make goes right back into the podcast. And we are so grateful to be in a position where you guys are supporting us. Thank you guys so much. Also, if you missed the memo, just wanted to give a quick shout so that everyone is aware that after this week, the merch store on letsgethaunted.com is going to be temporarily closed because Nat is due to give birth any day now. So if you'd like to support us, but you're not quite sure about the Patreon, definitely head over to letsgethaunted.com and snatch up some merch before the store is closed for the next 2-ish months until she's back on her feet and we're recording again. We also really appreciate everyone for keeping an open mind. We did choose to cut the personal hauntings just from this first month because we've been trying to stack up on episodes so that Nat can take a maternity leave, and it's hard to come up with personal hauntings when you're recording back-to-back days. But beyond that, we also have been trying to be very friendly and accessible to new listeners. We do occasionally get 1-star reviews on Apple Podcasts because of somebody new that found our show, doesn't understand how to skip the intro, and is super pissed that they're listening to 2 random people just chit-chat with each other. And that does negatively impact us when we go to advertisers. So we're just doing it for this month, and we'll see. Maybe we're going to add back in the personal hauntings. Maybe it's going to be a spin-off for Patreon only, which is what we're doing currently. Maybe it's going to be spun off into a after the credits type of personal haunting or a mini-sode on Fridays. We just don't know yet. We're doing a lot of brainstorming, growing this year. We're investing more money than ever into our show from our own pockets because we really, really want to bring you guys the best product possible. And it's not always going to work. Definitely while we're trying out new software and things to do, there's going to be a few episodes maybe where you're like, dang, the audio sucked, or dang, the editing sucked. And that's just us trying out different editing softwares and different recording softwares as we continue to try to find the best way to make this show for you. So definitely provide us feedback at Let's Get Haunted on Instagram on the photo dump for this week's episode. If you have anything pressing that you'd like to say, or you can always leave a comment in the Patreon, or you can email us, letsgethauntedpod@gmail.com. We are always open to any and all comments, concerns, questions, and constructive criticism. Now that I've talked your ear off enough, it's time for me to give you our secret password. This secret password you will comment on the photo dump for this week's episode, and that password is feral camel supremacy. See you guys next week. Bye.